Hello guys, welcome to the channel. In today's video we're going to be fitting those airbags to the suspension on our Sprinter, and we're off to see a really good friend of ours, Greg Keane. He's also got a extra long wheelbase Mercedes Sprinter, done a camper conversion on it. You've probably seen him in a few of our videos before. We touched base with Greg when we changed our Max fans on the roof because he had them already fitted. He's also already got the airbags fitted to his van. So we're off to see him to have a look at his installation, and he's going to give us a hand to fit ours as well. So we'll catch up with you when we get there. Morning guys, so we've arrived, we've met up with Greg. We're here on a industrial estate, and the reason that we're here because the weather at the moment is a little bit mixed, so we don't want to be stuck underneath the van and then the heavens open. We've got the option here of putting the van inside a unit, which is a massive help to us. So that'll just mean it's inside in the dry and we can work on it in all weathers. So yeah, we're gonna have a look at Greg's setup on his van. He's got a basic airbag setup already. Then we're going to get the kit out that we've ordered, unbox it all and go through what we've got. Hello mate.
Hi mate, how you doing?
Yeah, good, nice to see you again.
Yes, and you.
So of course we've come up to see you because you've already got airbags fitted on your van, haven't you? Yeah. And obviously, you know, you can give us a bit of help. So what was the reason why you fitted them on your van in the first place?
Because it looked loaded, basically. The back end was proper sitting down, and it just looked very heavy.
And you don't want to risk being pulled over on the road.
Well, I mean, I was still underweight
okay.
as a whole thing, but it just looked heavy.
Yeah.
That was my concern.
So just to lift it up a little bit, take some weight off them springs, and
and it's worked a treat.
Yeah. And then did you get your van upplated as well after you put the bags on?
I did. I had it weighed, and it was 20 kilos under, was it 3.5 ton, 3,500, and so I decided to go for the upplate up to 4 tons.
Oh, so yours is now 4 ton?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
And they've changed all your V5,
V5's
your
all been changed, everything, And the company I used did a new plate that you fit to your seat box at the side of the original one.
That's something that we'll probably consider doing as well once we've done the airbags on our van. I'll go through the whole process of that maybe in another video, because there are some reasons why you would want to do it and why you wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah,
because it does change the class of the vehicle as well.
It does. It means if you haven't got the 7.5 ton license, you can't drive it, basically.
Yeah. So if some of the younger viewers or whatever, if you, I'm all right because we're of the age where it was on our license, you might only be able to drive up to 3.5 ton anyway. So that's a consideration. You'd have to do a separate test in order to drive the heavier vehicle. And I think it also changes like the commercial class of the vehicle for MOT tests and things like that.
It does, yeah. This is now classed as a PHGV, personal heavy goods vehicle.
Yeah. So whereas before on a 3.5 ton vehicle you can, you know, with ours it's class 4 I think, so you can just get it MOT'd as if it was a car. Now you've got a different class of MOT.
I can't remember which one it is, but it is definitely a different test,
We'll cover all of that in another video, all the upplating process, but this video what we're going to do is we're going to get all the boxes out, unpack everything, have a look at all the kit, and then we're going to get under the van and start installing it. This diagram shows a setup on Greg's van. He's got a 12 volt compressor that pumps air into a storage tank, and then from the tank a manual paddle valve allows you to pump up the bags and also allows you to release air from the bags. So by lifting the paddle valve you're actually putting air into the bags, and then by pushing the paddle valve down it releases the air from the bags. A really simple little manual setup. So in this first box, this is the basic kit that I bought off of Amazon. Greg sent me the link, and this is really the bare bones of the system. We'll get it all out and then we'll go through each item. So there we go, that's everything unboxed. and unpacked, and then let's run through what we've got here. So we've got some low pressure hose, we've got a little compressor, only well 10 bar 150 psi 12 volt compressor there. That's more than man enough because these bags only take a couple of bar. There's a little low pressure gauge, little bag of compression fittings and nuts and bolts. These are obviously the bags, so these are what are going to actually lift the van up. And then we've got quite some substantial steel which bolts onto the chassis of the van and onto the axle to support the bags. So this is basically the fitting kit. So we've got everything you need here just to give you a basic system to pump some air into the bags just to lift them up by a couple of bar. So first job to do is to take these rubber bump stops off, which would normally, when the axle's moving up and down, that limits the travel. They would normally, the axle would hit that, and that's that phrase you hear people say of bottoming out. So we'll take them rubbers off, and then we've got those new metal brackets. We'll have to clean up these chassis rails, clean some of this muck off there so those new brackets slide over the top. So that's the next job. Okay. Screwdriver, nice big screwdriver. Pull that down. Come out, that wasn't easy.
You managed to cut a little bit more. That's it.
There we go. She's out. As easy as that. That wasn't too sad, was it? Right, so this little extending bracket gets slid into where the bump stop was, and then this hefty channel is what goes over the chassis rail, and that's what the bag is bracketed to. So what Greg's doing there now is just cleaning off some of that surface stuff that's on the chassis rails, just so those brackets will fit. They're a little bit tight with all that muck on there. Okay, so you can see now we've cleaned some of the sort of snotty bits off the side of the chassis there that were just preventing that bracket from going on. There's a little bracket that slides in place of the rubber bump stop. That's now in, sort of telescopes into either end so that the bolt holes line up. And then now Greg's just going to put the plate on the chassis. You've got it there.
Yeah.
You see it's like a big
See where the middle hole is?
Big C channel that wraps around the chassis rail, and then the centre hole line up with the hole that's in that little plate that we put in. Right,
yep.
That's the top bracket, and then we'll fix the bottom bracket to the airbag and slide that all in one. Right, what I've already done on the bench here, this is the inlet to the airbag. Tiny little threaded hole in here, probably about 1/4 of an inch. Again, these little connections, they've got compression fittings on them, threaded the other end, and then there's a little O-ring on the underside of these. So again, they just need threading into there and just nipping up with a spanner. There's no other jointing, paste or PTFE needed. And then the bracket obviously will get bolted onto the top of here, and that's what mounts it onto the van. Right, so we've made the low pressure line onto the bag. We've just nipped that little connection up to make sure that it's sound, and now it's time to fit the bracket onto the bags. Greg's going to do that while I'm filming him. And then this whole assembly will get lifted in over the top of the axle in one piece.
Just leave them like that.
Yeah,
And then we can knit those up when we know that the top side of the bag is level with the top bracket.
Brilliant. So we've jacked up the van and got it on blocks. You can see the gap now between that bracket we fitted originally and the axle is considerably more, giving us plenty of room to get those bags in. First thing that we need to do is take off these two Torx head bolts which hold the anti-roll bar on, because that's what the bracket that holds the airbags fixes onto. So they've got to undo those two bolts first, and then the bracket will be mounted on those two bolts. We've undone the anti-roll bar. Greg's taken those two torque head bolts out and now put the airbags in. So away you go, mate. So it's best to put them in from the front, slide them over the top of the axle. Just lift them over that little bracket there, mate. That's it. And then they just slide into place. And then it's a case of putting them two torque head bolts back in, and that's what secures that bracket. Two more bolts secure the top of the bag to the bracket on the chassis rail, and that's the bags installed. Morning guys, day 2 of this airbag build video. If you was just buying the simple basic airbag kit with the compressor and the manual switches, you could quite easily get that installed and fitted yourself in a day. I've obviously gone for a much more complicated control system and the solenoid valves and the remote control, so you know there's a lot more wiring involved, as you'll see in today's video. So yesterday we managed to get the airbags all fitted under the suspension underneath the van, so it's quite a physical day yesterday, crawling around under the van. And then today it's going to be mostly wiring and controls. We've got the main gas tank to fit underneath, which is the last piece to go underneath the body of the van, and then after that everything's going to be inside doing controls and wiring. Now, in addition to the basic airbag kit, I spoke to these guys, AirBag Man. They're based in Australia. They have got a dealer in Ireland that shipped me this box, so you can get it locally fairly easily. And in here is a whole load of controls, solenoid manifold, remote controls, just give me a lot more flexibility on what I can do with it. I've also got a pressure vessel in here as well, and a tyre inflating kit as well. So just adds to the airbag kit and gives you a few more options. So let's get this one out. Okay, so this is what we've got in the Airbag Man kit. We've got a pressure vessel, so this is going to store high pressure air, probably something around 140 psi. This tank is good for 200 psi. Got a couple of mounting brackets. We're going to try and locate this under the van, under the chassis, because it's always a good idea to keep the high pressure stuff out of the van if you can. There's a mains cable for the compressor with a 40 amp fuse. We've got more pressure lines. These are also rated for 200 psi, so they're good on the high pressure and the low side. We've got one pressure gauge and two pressure sensors. These will be connected on the low pressure side on the bags, and then this gauge, hopefully I'm going to put that in the cab, and that's going to tell me what the pressure is in each of the bags. We've got a big bag of fittings, a lot of stuff in there. I think that one's going to take more than half an hour to install. And then we've got a much more beefier compressor, 12 volt compressor again, but again this is easily good for a couple of hundred psi. And then here, this is the brains of the system. So we've got a manifold here with two solenoid valves in here. The high pressure gas will come into here, and then the low pressure goes to the bags, and you've got independent control of both bags with this solenoid manifold. And then this is the brains of the kit, this little receiver here. This sends a signal to the solenoid valves to put air into the bags. And then this is the little tricky little part which I like. We've got here, we've got a little remote fob, so we can stand outside the van and I can raise and lower it. So if we're in a campsite and we're on unlevel ground, I can raise and lower each of the airbags and level the van up, which is another feature that I really like. Okay, Looks a bit of a daunting task when you lay it all out, but let's get into it and let's get fitting it. So these are all a speed fit connection. The hoses will just push into these fittings. They already come with a little O-ring to seal them. This is the solenoid valve block, so all we need to do really is to wind these in and then nip them up with a spanner. And then once they're in nice and secure, and then all we need to do then is push the plastic pipe into these little speed fit connections. I know this looks pretty rough, but I just wanted to get an idea of where everything was going to go. So you've got the two bags on either side. You've got the expansion vessel, or the receiver if you like, underneath the van, which will hold all the high pressure air. The compressor will go inside the van, and the manifold with the low pressure lines coming out, that'll also go inside the van because they need to be waterproof. So the only thing that's going to go through the bottom of the van will be the two high pressure lines and the two low pressure lines. Okay, so we've drilled a hole in the garage, drilled a hole on this side and a hole on the other side where the batteries are, because I want to mount all the compressor and everything and the controls on this side. So I need a convenient wireway. So we've just pulled these 6mm cables, red and black, through this bit of conduit. I've drilled a 20mm hole. I'm just going to feed the conduit down, cable tie it around the chassis underneath, and then pull it back up this side. And this cable is good for about 50 amps I believe, and the compressor I think pulls about 35. So just going to feed this through the bottom of the van now. This is the high pressure vessel. So the compressor will pump air into this at about 150 psi, and this is 11 litres this tank, and that will store air at high pressure. Then it will come out the other end and go onto our manifold, where the control unit will control the solenoid valves, and then that will meter the high pressure air into the bags. But on that side of the solenoid valves it will be a very low pressure, only 2 to 3 bar maximum. It's got a drain on this tank because when you compress air, the moisture that's in the air can collect in the tank and you can get water build up in here. So I need to get a drain valve. They didn't supply one with this kit, so I will need to swap this out at some stage. But just for now, I've just put this little loop of tube in here just really to block off that connection. So that's something that I'll deal with later. And then the brackets for these is a 2-part bracket. You've got a split ring which is rubber lined, and then you've got this bracket which will mount onto the chassis of the van. And then what we're going to do is use the old riv nuts. You've seen me use those before. We'll drill a couple of holes in the chassis, compress these riv nuts in, and then that'll give us a nice secure fix in. Now, and what we'll do once we've put these in is I'll come back and drop a little bit of wax oil on those just to stop them going rusty. That's that. Right, so they're the brackets mounted to the bottom of the chassis rails there, with those riv nuts and bolts in there. We've left them couple of holes just at the side there. You'll see what we'll do is we'll put the high pressure lines in, a bit of conduit, and then we'll be able to cable tie them to the chassis as well out of the way. It's all nice and secure. Good job. At this end of the tank, what we've done is we've put the high pressure hose into a bit of conduit, and then that will give that a little bit of protection underneath the van from any sort of flying stones or bits and pieces. And then we've routed it down the side of the van here, cable tied it to those holes in the chassis, along with my other water tank conduit for my level gauges, and then it goes all the way down the side of the tanks, cable tied to that chassis rail there as well, so it's all nice and secure. And then what we'll do now is we'll introduce these low pressure lines from the bags. See this black line here, and the same on the other side, and we'll just put another bit of conduit in there and conduit them all the way back to the back of the van and then come up in the garage. So what we've done is we've brought all the high pressure lines and the low pressure lines all together to one common point, and then we're going to try and feed them all through one Copex, and then that'll be the Copex that comes up into the back of the garage. Now we put all the controls for the compressed air in the garage here, but obviously we can't have all this stuff floating around in here. So I want to disconnect it, get it into the workshop, and then put it into a panel so we can put it all safe and sound in the back of the garage here where it's not going to get damaged. There's quite a few cables and pressure lines got to come in and out of this panel, so I've had a bit of a count up, and there's 8 in total that I need to put through it. So I'm just laying out on some masking tape where I'm going to put all these little stuffing glands, and that's where all the cables and pressure lines will come through. And then on the side of the box I'll also lay out here where the 2 switches are going to go for the controller and the compressor. Right, I've drilled all the holes for the glands in the bottom. I've drilled another couple of holes in the side for a couple of little switches, one to be able to isolate the compressor and one to turn the controller off. And now I'm just going to drill a series of holes in the other side that you won't see, and these are just to vent the box, because when you let the air out, the air actually comes out of the solenoid valve block. So if I didn't have these vent holes, the panel would just blow up like a balloon. To drill these holes in the panel for the glands and also for the switches, it's exactly 20mm, and I'm using this little Starrett cutter. So that little bit of plywood that I've just cut is for a backing board for me to fix everything to. I could just screw it to the back of this plastic box, but I think this will just give it a bit more strength, and that will just drop in the bottom, and I'll just secure that with a couple of screws. So I'm just laying things inside the control box at the moment and seeing where the wires are going to have to go, so I can get it placed as neatly as possible without too much looking like, you know, a pile of spaghetti in here. But I think this is the arrangement I'm going to come up with. The pressure lines out of the solenoid valve can pretty much go straight out of the bottom of the box. I've got 12-volt power from the batteries to come in here onto the fuse board. They can come up this side and on there. This little voltage regulator has got to be close to these switches, so that's why I've put that there. And then the controllers here as well, and that is also fairly close to the switches, so the cables are up this side, so hopefully that will make it a little tidy in there. Okay, so I've got everything mounted in the panel now. I'll just give you a quick run through of what I've got here. So this is the solenoid. It's got 2 solenoid valves in here. The high pressure air comes into the middle, and then the low pressure air to the bags comes off of each of the solenoids. That gives us the independent control. This is the receiver for the remote control, and it's also the brains of the whole thing. There's a little circuit board in there. These white wires are the wires that go to the solenoid valves. you've got a power supply, and there's a neutral and an aerial there for the remote. There's just a negative bar there that I've got to connect the negatives together. This is a DC power regulator, voltage regulator. This controller is very sensitive, so it doesn't like to see a charge voltage. So in order to restrict the voltage to 12 volts, I've had to put this inline voltage regulator. It's taking a feed off of the blade fuse holder, and then this regulates the voltage on the output side via this switch to the controller, so it only ever gets 12 volts and no more. We've got a blade fuse holder. I'll run a positive and a negative up to that from my batteries, which will be a main supply cable, and then everything's fed off of that. And then lastly, on the control side, I've got a little relay here which is switching power to the compressor. I've got a switch in line with that, so I can turn the compressor off at any time when I don't want it running. Sometimes when the vessel loses a little bit of air, the compressor will come on at random times, you know, middle of the night, and wake you up. So when I'm not using it, I can conveniently just flick it off on that switch. And then what the relay does, the switching voltage is very low, but obviously the power that the compressor takes is quite high. So you've got larger power cables on this side. You can see this quite thick cable here. That's the mains power to the compressor, and these other thinner cables are just the control side on the switching. And then on the compressor there's a pressure switch which is preset at about 150 psi. If the pressure drops below that, the compressor will automatically cut in and boost the high pressure tank. So there we go, there's the whole panel complete. That's all the controls. I'm just going to get that mounted in the back of the garage now in the van. I'm going to hold this control panel in place in the garage with a couple of timber noggins installed into that back wall of the garage area. And you've seen me use this before. This is the old Craig jig. I'm going to put some pocket screws in there just to hold these battens in place. There we go, that'll conceal the screw. I've just driven that pocket hole screw in there, and you can see it comes out more or less centered in the end of the workpiece, and then that's the length of the screw that will drive into the other stud. These are just simple push fit fittings, so it's quite easy to make these off. Just a case of measuring where you want to cut. And leave myself a little bit of slack. Get a really sharp tool like these little guillotine. Makes a really nice clean cut. And then they just push up into that fitting. Make sure that they're pushed all the way home. That's it. And that's it, simple as that. Now this is the best part of the system. Obviously with this little remote I can now lower the van. See it coming down there. And then similarly with the push of the button I can pump the van back up. Oh, isn't that good? So now we've got the airbags fitted and the back of the van is sort of elevated a little bit. What it's also done is it's kind of stiffened up the suspension a little bit as well, and the biggest difference I've noticed when driving a van, especially on these little country lanes and roundabouts, is it's massively reduced the body roll on the van, which is really good. You know, occasionally we used to go around a tight corner maybe a little bit too quick, you get the odd drawer flying open and things like that, but yeah, it's helped with the handling on the road massively. I think having those independent bags helps as well, because I think when the two bags are joined together, I think what Greg was experiencing on his van was that when the body rolled, it squashed one bag and effectively pumped up the other bag, so kind of made the situation worse. So if you can have independent control on both bags, so that the air doesn't transfer from one to the other, I think you have a really good ride. But this has made the world of difference. Soaks up all those little bumps and yeah, make the ride much better. And of course now it doesn't look anywhere near as loaded as it did before. So yeah, brilliant. Really pleased with it. So there we go. Hope you found that video to be interesting and useful to you. If you found my other van build videos to be useful when you're doing your own van conversion, please do consider subscribing to the channel. It doesn't cost anything, it's completely free, and it's a great way of saying thanks. See you on the next video, guys. Cheers!